Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Janet Glick, and I serve as the Associate Director of On-Campus Events at the Alumni Association of Mount Holyoke College. Our work at the Alumni Association is all about creating meaningful opportunities for alums to connect. Registered for this webinar are more than 30 alums and students from 10 states and 9 decades, from classes of 1949 through the class of 2018. Thank you for being with us today. For those of you who could not join us, we'll be providing a recording after the fact. At Reunion each year, we've focused on providing back-to-class sessions for attendees to attend. We are now offering a virtual way to learn and engage with faculties on events like this one, and we'll be continuing to expand such offerings. If you have questions along the way, please include it in the chat box. We'll be monitoring and focusing on them at the close of the panel discussion. We encourage you to please complete our post-event survey to share ideas on future back-to-class options. It is so great to be here virtually with Dave Allen, head swimming and diving coach and senior lecturer in physical education and athletics. David Allen has been the head coach of the Mount Holyoke swimming and diving team since 1998. Since his arrival, the swim team has broken more than 100 records. In addition to his coaching duties, Allen is the aquatics director and a physical education instructor at Mount Holyoke. As an instructor, he teaches swimming at all levels, Red Cross lifeguarding and water safety instructor, and sports pedagogy. He is an active member in the National Council for the Accreditation of Coaching Education. He also currently serves as the Assistant Director and swim coach at the United States Sports Camps, which he has been involved with since 1988. Today, Dave is going to talk about sports specialization in children. Is it better than training as a multi-sport athlete? Welcome, Dave. We're so glad to have you here with us.
Thank you, Janet. I appreciate it. So let me see. I'm going to share my screen, right? You guys see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you, because I can't see. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, and it's great to hear that we have so many alums across the years, and hopefully you find this informative as well as entertaining. So again, my name is Dave Allen, and I've coached at Mount Holyoke for 21 years, but I've coached well over 30 years, and also worked as an athletic trainer back in my younger days before I got back into coaching full time. And today we're just going to talk a little bit about coaching or children in coaching and sports, and specifically specialization. Does it make sense to have 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds specializing in one sport? So the first thing we have is a poll that, Janet, if you could put up. Is it better to specialize, or is it better to be a multi-sport athlete? What do you think?
Okay, Dave, the results are 100% of them said multi-sport athlete.
All right, well, thank you. It's been nice talking with you. Have a great day. That makes my job a little bit easier, I guess. So, and we'll talk about it because there are some benefits in different places. But another question is, why do kids play sports? So when we talk about specialization, you know, the question really becomes why? And I think it's really important to think about, why do kids play sports? And if you think about it, there's a lot of different reasons. Top 10 reasons. Number one, kids want to have fun. And even if you ask high schoolers and college kids, you know, if they're playing sports, they want to have fun. If it's not fun, there's no reason to do it. And so they also want to get exercise. Kids want to move. They want to improve skills. They want to make friends. They want to challenge themselves. They want to play on a team. And if you look, number 8 is winning. So winning is important, but it's not really the top of the list. They want to get better. They want to see themselves improve. They want to be out there with friends and socializing. And I do think that when we start talking about specializing, that changes kind of the narrative of what we're talking about, what we're trying to do. And winning becomes much more important. And a lot of times winning is more important to parents than kids. So if you were to ask parents the same thing as far as their goals, winning would be much higher up on the list. Amanda Visick from George Washington asked kids, why do you play sports? 9 out of 10 said it was because it was fun. And what made it fun? Trying your best. When the coach treats you, a player, with respect, getting playing time, playing well as a team, getting along with teammates, being active. That's what's important to children. So as we're looking at how we handle sports and what we do, that's going to be a major component of things we should look at. And then what takes the enjoyment out of sports? Why do kids not like sports anymore? Poor coaching, punishment for mistakes, and that comes from parents and coaches, peer rivalries. A lot of these kids, my son plays on teams in the area, and he was at school and, with some of these kids and playing on another team. And so now you start pitting team against team, and you're pitting friend against friend, and it starts to get a little bit, excessive. And when we look at it and you think, oh, I'm a Yankees fan or I'm a Red Sox fan, there's some pretty vulgar things that can happen between those two teams and the fans and all of that. But that's really not what youth sports should be about. But parents a lot of times will take it down to that level. And that kind of just off-puts a lot of people. Overemphasis on winning. Again, no one starts playing sports and is in sports because they want to lose all the time. They want to win, but they also want to play and go out and have fun. And then excessive training and expectations. Again, kids want to do a variety of things and be out there and having a good time. The ASPEN Institute has this project play where they've really looked at children's sports and the effects. They did a parent survey and found that over 60% of children quit sports by the age of 11. That's a pretty stark number, and considering where we are with the obesity epidemic, kids staying in the homes and being on devices and things like that, that's something we really need to be thinking about. And by the time 13, over 70% of kids are no longer playing sports. So Danielle, this is where the video is.
Sure thing. Great. Let me aim to pull up from my screen here.
I'm here to announce my retirement from sports. Baseball, basketball, all of them. I feel like it's time. The pressure that it takes to play at my age is just too much. So I'm done with the endless advice from parents to keep my head up, to keep my head down, to keep my head in the game. I know you think you helped. I'm walking away from the coaches that left me on the bench every time the game was on the line. I'll miss my friends and the fun we had when we were young. I said I'd play this game as long as I was having fun. And now, it's time to call it quits. Any questions?
So again, that ad is part of a campaign from the ASPEN Institute trying to talk about kids and really getting them to think about, or parents really to think about what we're doing to children in sports. And again, I think that goes back to specialization. A lot of this also has to do with coaching. And, as an example, I have a 14-year-old son. So I've been watching parents and coaches for the last, 12 years or so, a little less, maybe 10 years, since he's played sports. I'm the guy on the side that's actually kind of paying more attention to coaches and parents than their own child playing. Don't tell them. But, there was a couple of years ago where we were playing a basketball game, and I think he was like 10, and a kid on the other team made a mistake, and the coach slammed down a clipboard. The entire gym went quiet. Everyone on the floor stopped, turned, and looked at him. And it really started to just sink in, these are 10-year-olds. They're going to make mistakes. It's okay. But that pressure to win and that unhealthy atmosphere, I mean, imagine how that kid felt when the coach slammed the clipboard. It was pretty obvious, he was pointing at one individual. And so that really just starts to skew what people are thinking about with sports. And that's why kids, by the time they're 13, they're just done because it's no longer fun. So this is a chart from the ASPEN Institute as well that shows kind of the age that kids last participate. And if you look at it, they don't participate for very long, right? And again, why is that? Well, just because we're focused on winning. We're focused on adult values and what is called the professionalization of sports. And so all of a sudden, you know, you've got a 10-year-old, 11-year-old that says, you know what, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And then they quit sports, and then we lose them as, you know, for health reasons, for developing them as leaders, as well as a lot of late bloomers are really, really good athletes. So if we lose them at 10, but then all of a sudden they have a growth spurt at 14 or 15, we never get them back, right? And so we lose a lot of talent that way. As an example, my son, again, was playing travel ball, and he did that 3 years ago. And one thing kids want to do, they want to play. They would rather lose and play than win and sit on the bench. Well, he had the worst of both worlds because they lost all the time, and he sat on the bench. It was a little ironic that they seemed to win more when the coach put in all the players, but for whatever reason, he focused more on the top kids. And so after that season, he's like, Dad, I'm done. I don't want to play anymore. And I was like, well, you know what? We have two options. You can go and try out for travel again, which wasn't a very positive experience, or we've got rec, and you can play in town. It's not as intense, a couple less practices a week. And so he played rec. And over the last 2 years, he has really developed into a really good basketball player. But if I just said, okay, you know what, you don't have to do that, we'll focus on something else, you know, he would have gotten lost in that number. And we need to be thinking about, you know, again, how we're coaching kids and what we're expecting. And this is just another chart saying that most kids only try 2 sports, and then usually between 7 and 10, and then they're done. So specialization, you know, we want kids to be going out and trying all kinds of different sports. My son played soccer. He didn't like soccer, so we didn't play soccer anymore. We tried archery, we tried lacrosse, we've tried basketball. You know, we've put him in a lot of different things. Come to find out, he doesn't like soccer because he has to run, and he likes lacrosse because he's the goalie. So he does not have to run. He chose goalie for the wrong reason because he didn't want to run, but he's a really good goalie. So it worked out in the end. So worst memory. Ask college kids, and you can even ask high school kids, you know, what's your worst memory from youth and high school sports? Okay. Overwhelming response is really simple. The PGA, the ride home from the game with my parents. So kids are getting it from both sides. The coach wants them to do one thing. The parents are telling them another thing. You know, their post-game analysis, the PGA. You know, kids want to get in the car and be able to relax and just, you know, put the game behind them. And a lot of times parents are there and giving them critiques and things like that. So this is another poll, okay? What is the goal of youth sports? So I think you're going to choose 3, okay? So what's the top 3 goals for youth sports?
Okay, it looks like the top one would be physical fitness. Well, having fun was number 1, I should say.
Okay.
And then physical fitness. And then tied would be making friends and learning teamwork. So those were the top sort of 3.
Okay.
It's actually a top 4.
All right.
Because those 2 tied.
Tied. Okay. Well, excellent. Yeah, and those are some of the big reasons. So that's why kids want to play sports. That's what we're hoping for them to get out of it. And the thing to remember is, you know, we always talk about what sports teach. You know, they teach teamwork, and they teach resiliency, and they teach sportsmanship. And in reality, they don't teach anything. It's the coaches and the parents that are on the sideline that are teaching things. And again, I think that's really important as we get into this discussion here in a second, as far as, you know, what is specialization and why do we do it? So, by the way, that is perfect form for a squat. That the little child is holding that barbell. And it's amazing how perfect little kids know how to move. And then we lose it as we get older. You won't be able to see too many adults get into that position. And that's actually a really good squat position. So again, what are kids looking for? What are we hoping they do? Develop self-esteem, peer socialization, make friends, right? Want them physically active. You know, when they're physically active, not only are they healthier, they're actually smarter. It's well correlated that the more active people are, the better they do in school. They want to have fun. They want to develop motor skills. You can develop leadership, how to handle winning and losing. So there's a lot of different things, resiliency, grit, those types of things that will come through youth sports if we allow that to happen and we do it in the right way. So sports specialization is defined as intense year-round training in a single sport with the exclusion of other sports. Usually it's considered 8 months or more. Depending on the sports and the season, it's usually more like 10 months or 11 months. So it's usually pretty intense with not much time off. Multi-sport players play 2 or more sports per year. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a snapshot here, for specialized athletes, there are some sports that work really well with specialization. One is gymnastics. And the reason why with gymnastics is it's such a demanding sport. And by the time you get into college, you need to really have high level skills. And, it just was one of those where you start to break down as well. Men's soccer, 68% are Division I players, 62% of Division I women's soccer players were specialized athletes. And again, specialized depends by, it's using the age of 12. And then tennis, 66% of men and 75% of women tennis players. And then if you look at hockey, 55% received scholarships and were specialized by the age of 12. But that also means that 45% weren't. So there's a lot of people that are still at the highest level and getting scholarships and playing at Division I. Having said that, Division III is the largest division within NC2As. So there are a lot more people playing at Division III than there are at Division I. We always talk about and watch on TV all the big time stars and the big time programs with basketball and football, but there are more athletes playing at Division III. So again, what's kind of the goal? What are you trying to get out of sports? What are we hoping to do? In the same survey, 71% of men's football were multi-sport players. 88% of men and 83% of women lacrosse players also did multiple sports. And then 87% of female runners and 91% of male runners were multi-sport athletes. So running, if you do a sport, a land sport, you're going to be running and you're going to start to develop those skills. So it's a little bit easier to transition there. But it's also one of those that, a lot of times kids will run, but they won't be, long distance runners. They won't be cross country runners until they get into high school, but they will be involved in other sports. So lots of different sports. Again, multi-sport works very well. So benefits of specialization, early peak performance. Again, gymnasts, really by the time they're 21, they're pretty much done with their sport. There's not too many that go on after about that age. Attain age group success. So coming up, normally coming up in a couple of weeks would be the Little League World Series. And if people really want to be good at the Little League World Series and try to win that, then early specialization probably works. But again, that also has some long-term consequences we'll talk about in a few minutes. But in order to get there, you've got to be pretty good at baseball. If you specialize, you can join elite clubs with access to top coaches. My question mark there is, are they really top coaches or are they just the most successful? And sometimes coaches do different things and things that are not necessarily in the best interest of athletes, but they're still successful. And so the question becomes, again, what do you want your child to get out of their experience? They can master a very sport-specific skill. So if you wanted to learn how to juggle a soccer ball or, kick a goal penalty kick, those types of things, if you specialize early, you'll be better at that in the short term. And then if you want increased competition, but increased competition also then has the downside of the potential for injury, which we'll talk about in a minute. So multi-sport, they have more long-term success. They end up being smarter, kind of more creative players, better overall skills and ability. And the way I look at it is this. What we do when we put a child in the classroom in high school or even in elementary school is we teach them English, we teach them math, we teach them science, we teach them history, we teach them a second language, right? They're developing all kinds of different skills. Well, the same thing with a multi-sport athlete. It may not seem like it, but even if you play soccer and lacrosse, those are two different skills. And so those skills are going to come across in slightly different ways and just allow the athlete to have a better learning experience, more depth in their movement. They're able to move across the field in a slightly different way. They're able to jump and land in a different way. And so that allows the athlete to learn a little bit better. And again, it may not be great for the short-term success, but long-term success is where we're looking for. And the same thing goes even within practices. So if you sit and watch a practice that a coach is running and they're doing 15 minutes of the same drill, you'll see that the athletes at that point in time will be really good with that drill at the end of practice. If you come back the next practice, they're probably not going to be as good. They don't retain that information as well, as compared to what's called randomized practice, in which they may do a drill for 2 minutes on one thing and then move over to a totally different thing, and then go on to a third thing and a fourth thing, and then come back to the first, and kind of randomizing and mixing things up, kind of like you would play a game. And when you look at it, you're like, wow, that's really kind of discombobulated, disjointed. It doesn't look very good. But in fact, long-term learning happens so much better when you randomize those practices. So it's kind of the same thing with specialization versus multi-sport. You're learning skills, you're learning for the long term. Limit of overuse injuries. So athletes, when they are playing the same sport, they have the same stressors on their body all the time. Swimmers, if they're swimming all the time, their shoulders are taking a beating. If they're playing tennis, their elbow is taking a beating. If they're playing a pitcher in baseball, their elbow is definitely under stress. So by switching off different sports, you're changing up the demands on the body, and they'll be able to recover a little bit easier. Less pressure, less burnout, more fun. After a while, doing something gets really long. After our 19-week season of swimming, I think we're all just a little bit happy to be done the day after championships. It's like, oh, okay, good. I can take a breath now. So imagine doing that, 11 months out of the year. And, swimming and gymnastics is probably pretty similar. You get a couple weeks off in the spring, you get a couple weeks off in August. And if you take anything else, then you're not, going to make the team, so to speak. And so there's this real big pressure to continue with the specialization. And then accumulate cross-sport skills. And again, if you learn how to be a better soccer player, you learn how to be a better lacrosse player, a better basketball player. They're all intertwined. So I also work with Positive Coaching Alliance, which was a group founded back in the late 90s. And again, its thought was, youth sports are not very good right now. We need to be a much more positive influence on kids' life. So Positive Coaching Alliance came out, and they've kind of made it really simple as far as stages of talent development, right? So when you look at children, a lot of the times when they start playing, it's just out there, they're having fun. A coach when they're 6 and 7 should roll out the ball and let them go kick it around for a while and just let them experience it. Because they're just trying to figure it all out, but it's fun figuring it all out. They're out there running around with friends, and it's a good time. And that goes up until about probably 12. 13 could be a little bit younger depending on the age of the child or the development of the child. Then you get into the technical stage, doing it right? That's usually, again, right around puberty, because you may be doing something right, and then all of a sudden you grow 4 inches and it's wrong. And you're trying to do the same skill again, but you can't because your arms and your legs are all over the place. And as someone that is 6'5", that decided in 8th grade to switch from basketball to swimming, I can relate to that. And about the age of 19 or 20, I started to be able to play basketball fairly well after taking a few years off and figuring out my body. So the same thing happens with kids, and same thing happened with my son. He's grown about 6 inches in the last year, and we were shooting basketball the other day, and he's like, yeah, this doesn't feel right. You're totally different. Of course it doesn't feel right. So the technical stage, goes up through high school, could be junior high school, junior in high school or senior in high school, and through college. Okay, and then mature stage is really a high level of performance. And this is where the athlete has really learned the motor skills. Their body is fully developed. And when we're talking about 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds, ligaments and tendons and growth plates, they're all open. They're all, figuring out how to work together. So it's really tough to get a high level of performance, but that early specialization, the professionalization of sports, we want kids to be performing at really high levels when they're 12 and 13, and they're just not ready for it. So the mature stage is really college level and beyond. And if you look now at professional sports, almost every professional sport, has people in it that are 30 and 40 years old competing. So there's lots of different opportunities to still compete as you get older. Unlike when it used to be, if you went to the Olympics, you might go to the age of 22 or 23, but there was no money in sports. So you really got out and got a job. And even now, if you have a job, you can still compete in master's programs and everything, the different options that they have. So things to think about. Be aware of cutting the romantic stage too short. It's probably better to be in the romantic stage a little longer and then have those kids have the excitement, have the enthusiasm, have the fun that they want. And then work on the technical sides, right? Then get a little bit more into the actual training instead of when they're 10 years old, have them constantly hitting off of a tee or, the things that get the drills that will really kind of take the fun out of it. Manage the transition from stage 1 to stage 2, right? And again, make it fun. Talent is not obvious early. Again, late bloomers usually do really well as athletes, but a lot of times they've been eliminated from the system. And again, just looking at my son, he got eliminated from the travel basketball team and we had to work, there's no doubt. And we actually had a couple of basketball players here that helped him out. But he got so much better over the last 2 years and now he's excited to try to play basketball in high school. So he was one that just wasn't as coordinated when he was 12, but now he's really grown into that, okay? And then supporting kids where they are and what they're trying to do. So Ballier is one of the people that has come up with a really much more detailed and long-term plan, and it really goes from 0 to 4-year-olds and all the way up into masters training and competing as well. And so really what we're looking at is how do people develop and become the best athlete they can over the entire lifetime. But just to save a little time, we'll skip all those steps. So what are some of the dangers of specialization? So first off is increased risk of overuse injuries. So if you know anything about baseball, you probably have heard of Tommy John surgery. And what that is the inside of your elbow, there's an ulnar collateral ligament. And because pitchers are pitching a ball, they're stretching out that ligament all the time. And it never used to be a problem, but now young kids are specializing in baseball. They're throwing, 6, 8, 10 months out of the year, and that ligament is being destroyed and torn. And then they have to get what's called Tommy John surgery, where they go in and they harvest another tendon or ligament from another part of their body and put back their elbow. It used to only be in really professional sports, and now it's happening in 14 and 15-year-old baseball players. Other things, tendinitis and things like that, and swimmers with shoulders and things like that. So there's lots of overuse injuries. Burnout. Again, after a while, kids just want a break. They want something different. And this is just this interesting conversation that we continually have on a group that I'm in Facebook. And there are some swim coaches that are like, there is no such thing as burnout. And it's like, yeah, there is. Kids get tired, right? Kids get tired mentally, kids get tired physically. And again, their bodies need time to grow, adjust. And if we're constantly putting kids under the same pressure all the time, their body's going to break down, and so will their minds. Okay. There was an interesting study that looked at motor control, and that's not supposed to say, it's supposed to say body, not boy. Decrease in lower body motor control. So what they looked at was specialized basketball players, soccer players, and I forget the other sport, but they looked at them compared to multi-sport athletes. What they found was that they didn't have as good a control when they were landing. And so as they would jump up and say, try to get a rebound in basketball and bring it down, if they don't have the correct landing mechanics, they could sprain an ankle, blow out an ACL. So most of the literature says that there's really no increased risk of acute injuries between specialized athletes as compared to multi-sport athletes. But I do think that that's a very interesting study that looked at, how are people controlling their bodies? And again, if they're doing one thing the same way all the time, their body will adjust to it and will never be corrected. But if they play different sports, their body can kind of adjust and potentially fix that problem. Then there's also structural changes. One study found that 93% of hockey players have a hip anatomy change that predisposes them to FAI, which is femoral, it's an impingement syndrome. And so because they're in such a crouched position, forward position all of the time, their joints are actually changing to accommodate that. And so if you're specializing in hockey, when you get older, you're in a pretty good spot for having some arthritis as well as this impingement syndrome because of actual physical structural changes. Another example, when I was at University of Rochester, I was the master's coach, and I was working with one older gentleman. He was in his 70s, and he came to me one day and he said, I can only turn my head to the right. I can't turn my head to the left. I was like, oh, that's interesting. He said, yeah, I went and I saw the doctor, and he blames it on, I always breathe on my right when I swim. And he swam every day. So every day he got in the pool and kept breathing to his right. And eventually he couldn't turn his head to the left. So, we do that with children as well, having them continually going into the specialization. Another, example also is thinking about golf. And golf is a one-sided sport where they're always swinging to one side. So if you're specializing early, you get the techniques down, but you can also put a lot of pressure on your back and being able to control it. And so doing balancing exercises and things like that will really help to offset the one-sidedness of that sport. So why early specialization? What's going on? Why are we doing this? Well, long and short is money. So it's a $15 billion industry, and that was a few years ago. It's probably a little higher than that now. Clubs need their kids to be there in order to make money. So if I'm running a USA swimming club, if I don't have swimmers year round, I'm not getting paid. I don't have a club. If I open up a facility, there's a facility in Westfield that it has a indoor soccer and lacrosse field, and it has a separate building with a pool in it, and it has a separate gymnastics and tumbling facility as well. They're all in a row. It's kind of one big complex. But they've got millions and millions of dollars just in infrastructure. If they can't get kids in there and they can't keep the money coming in, then they're going to lose out. Personal trainers, everyone wants to get a personal trainer because everyone's going to go professional. Everyone's going to get a scholarship. And so we're going to hire these people to make us better and push us along. So people are really looking at trying to earn a college scholarship. Recruiting services, recruiting services can charge thousands of dollars to try to get you a college scholarship. It's not a very good investment actually, but they will work with you to try to get you a college scholarship. Everyone's going to turn pro, right? Everyone's, I'm going to be the guy that makes it through, or the woman that's going to make it through, and very few people turn pro. Or if they do, they don't, last very long. And then really, the fear of missing out, right? FOMO. People, want to do what their neighbors are doing. Their kids want to do what the other kids are doing. But in reality, that's where kids get into trouble. And, it's okay to miss out sometimes. So winning isn't everything, from Vince Lombardi. It's the only thing. And so, that's kind of the mentality of a lot of people nowadays. Win at all costs. Coaches, parents, we've got to win. We've got to win. And again, kids care about that. But I tell you what, my son's over losing about 5 minutes after, he gets in the car. Now it's changing a little bit now that he's getting into high school. Winning's going to be a little bit more important. But he's also, turning 15 here pretty soon. So that's an appropriate age for those to start to change. But unfortunately, youth sports, winning is everything a lot of the time. And that's the negative effect, and that's the pressure that kids feel. So a good book by Mark Hyman, Until It Hurts. He talks about how in his introduction that he has a picture of his son and him out in the backyard, and the middle of winter in Maryland, and his son's got a red hat on and mittens on, and they're actually practicing baseball off of a tee, hitting off a tee. And the thing is, his son was 18 months old. And he's like, we could have been doing so many different things. I'm not sure why I thought he needed to be hitting off of a tee at 18 months old. And so, and again, his book is about his journey going with his son through this development. And his son actually ended up having Tommy John surgery in high school and potentially missing out on a college scholarship because he had to have surgery and just the timing of it all. So it's kind of an interesting read to see that progression. And so what parents want to do and what they really think they need to do might be two different things. So the American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine has a consensus statement that came out in 2016. Basically said early sports specialization is not a requirement for success at the highest levels of competition, and it's believed to be unhealthy physically and mentally for young athletes. It also discourages unstructured free play. And that unstructured free play is incredibly important, and we've lost a lot of that. And again, used to be the kids would run around the neighborhoods a lot, and now, everyone's inside, everyone's afraid to let their kids walk down to the park. Heck, people let their kids walk down to the park, and then the police get called because they're abandoning their children. So unstructured free play, kids will figure it out, okay? The primary outcome of the think tank was that there is no evidence that young children will benefit from early sports specialization in the majority of sports. Okay. So Danielle, this is the next video.
Sure thing.
And we'll probably just play like a minute or so of it. I wasn't going to play the whole thing. So watching that video, who is his coach? Where did he learn that? Where was the structure? That is really kids going out and just playing. And yes, you can make the argument that, well, he's on the streets and he's a hazard and all of that, and all those arguments. But at the same time, he's an incredible athlete. He's not in a competitive sport with what he's doing, but he's an incredible athlete that just went out and played. One of the arguments that we have a lot with soccer and U.S. men's soccer specifically, compared to the world, is the rest of the world lets their kids do a whole lot more playing of soccer and less coaching of soccer when they're young. So that unstructured free play, they figure out how to move. They figure out how to kick the ball. And just as an example, I know Pele did not actually invent the bicycle kick, right? But if you think about it, what coach is going to have people in practice a bicycle kick? That's the kids in the backyard going, hey, let me try this, let me do that, and they just learn it on their own and they just practice it on their own. And I think, too many kids are just over-coached. They just need to go out and have a parent or, a coach roll out the ball and says, go make your own rules, go out and have fun. So unstructured free play is a really big component of kids' development. And again, it really shows and develops sportsmanship. I remember, walking to the park, which was across the swamp through two neighborhoods, had to walk through people's backyards. We get to the park and we would come up with teams. And as soon as one team was blowing another team out, we'd switch sides. Like, okay, we got to switch these people up. We got to switch the different teams. And we would make it fair. And we would want people to win, you want to win, but at the same time, we wouldn't want it to be uneven. And so there's lots of lessons that get lost in there by, coaches and parents setting up these rules and these guidelines for kids in sports. So a couple things to consider. NFL drafts over the past 5 years, 90% of first round picks were multi-sport athletes. Early specialization in boys carries a higher risk of injury in baseball, cheerleading, and gymnastics. Early specialization for girls carries a higher risk of injury in running, swimming, soccer, volleyball, cheerleading, and gymnastics. Major League Baseball players who specialized early reported more injuries related to that specializing early. Only 3 to about 6% of youth athletes ever play in college. 3 to 6%, that's a pretty low number. Right? So we're spending a lot of time trying to develop these kids, and maybe they're not going to play in college. The average college scholarship is $10,000. 2% of high school student athletes will receive an athletic scholarship. So again, people are like, oh, I'm going to get a scholarship. I know I'm going to get a scholarship. Even when I'm recruiting swimmers, one of their questions are, do you have athletic scholarships? And some of them, could make our team, but they're not necessarily the best. And it's like, you won't be able to get a college scholarship. You need to have these conversations where you're not qualified to get a college scholarship. And so there's just these really unrealistic expectations about, where college athletic scholarships come from. In a book more than a few years ago now, Tom Ferry, Game On, estimated that many of the families that he was talking with and writing the book about spent over $100,000 to pursue an athletic scholarship. And if you think about that, if a scholarship is only worth $10,000 over 4 years, that's $40,000. Not a very good investment of their money. And he worked mostly, he works for ASPEN, or did at the time, and mostly did his work in Connecticut. So the families had a little bit more resources, but they spent a lot of money on private coaching and club teams and things like that. Only about 0.03 to 0.5% of high school athletes will go on to play professionally. But again, that's one of the reasons why we specialize, right? We're going to be one of those 0.03%. Nothing more than a cute little thing. But again, when we start putting kids in places where, okay, you got to be competitive, it just adds on to the stress. So benefits, again, of the multi-sport athletes, just go over it again. They have an equal elite athletic participation in sports compared to those who specialize early. So they don't get that much, they're not behind. Everyone wants them to be so great in high school, but as they continue to go on, they become better and better. Early diversified sports tend to have longer sports career, and more importantly, tend to continue to participate in athletics into adulthood, right? So we're talking a lifetime here. So if you know how to play multiple sports, as an adult, you're more likely to go out and play multiple sports, okay? Early diversification allows for more positive youth development. High amounts of unstructured play leads to more enjoyable participation in sports and less burnout. And again, unstructured play promotes better motor and cognitive skills. And then around the age of 13, okay, let's start having that conversation of, do you need to specialize? My son is actually a fairly good lacrosse goalie. And I said, no, if you want, let's go play golf in the fall, and you can try out for the basketball team, and then you can play lacrosse in the spring. I said, but right now we're not going to specialize. We're not going to go on the club team. We're going to do what we, can in our backyard and at home, and, but you're going to play a couple of different sports. And then if, he gets into high school and he's, junior year, he's like your sophomore, junior, he really wants to be on a club team, we'll have that conversation. Quote from Dr. Charles Popkin, an orthopedic surgeon: sadly, what parents want and what parents hope to gain from their children's participation in youth sports is often at a significant extreme to what the kids actually want, right? So again, parents are putting all of this on kids. Back when I was growing up, which was a while ago, the door was open at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and you came home for lunch, and you went back out, and you came home at dinner, and there wasn't any, expectation of you're going to be this or doing that, and there was not a lot of structure. And now there's a lot more structure and there's a lot more expectations. Journal of Athletic Training, in an article with Sports Specialization, specifically sports specialized athletes exhibit higher variability for these couplings, which may represent less stable hip coordination and knee coordination patterns during landing and may ultimately lead to less efficient or more risky biomechanical outcomes. That is the article that I cited before, where kids, they looked at kids that were multi-sport as compared to single sport, and they had better landing. So it was basketball, soccer, and volleyball athletes. So the multi-sport athletes knew how to land much better. So just a little video here. This one actually should work.
Ready, set, swing it. There it is. Remember, keep your eye on the ball. Try it again. Try it. On the ball. Swing. On the ball. Yep. Struck.
So there's three things that I like about that video. One, it's just darn cute. Two, really talks about communication. What are you saying and what do you really mean by what you're saying? And obviously to a 3-4-year-old, keep your eye on the ball means literally I'm going to go put my eye on the ball. And obviously for a 12-year-old, it's going to mean something totally different. So communication. And then the third thing is he made a mistake, but he got a hug for it. And how often do we do that with our athletes? How often do we do that with our children? And, everyone messes up. There's always mistakes, and so how are we judging our kids? How are we judging the kids that play for us as compared to, recognizing that mistakes happen? Also, another story with that is, my son played T-ball, and there was 2 years of T-ball. 1 year was at Hadley and one was in South Hadley. And Hadley was with a friend, and we went up there, and that T-ball experience was 4 stations. Kids had to hit, run, pass, and I forget maybe what the 4th station was, but that's what they did. 4 stations, 1 hour, 15 minutes each. And then he played the same, level T-ball in South Hadley, and they actually played games. And after about the first or second game, the T went away. And so here these kids are where they're just trying to learn how to swing a bat, never mind hit a moving ball. And parents were thinking, oh, we've got to get them hitting live balls. And it's like, no, you've got to get them to be able to swing a bat appropriately. Like, slow down, let kids be kids, and let's work through that. And then this is just another quote again. There is no evidence intense training and specialization before puberty are necessary to achieve elite status. Risks of early sports specialization include higher rates of injury, psychological stress, and quitting sports at a young age. So I work with a couple of different groups. One is the American Sport Education Program. So I've taught a class here called Sport Pedagogy. And the idea with the American Sport Education Program, athletes first, winning second, right? Winning is not unimportant, but we want to make sure that athletes are taken care of ahead of time. And then I also work with the Positive Coaching Alliance, and one of their ideas is better athletes, better people, right? Sports can make better people, but only if they're taught the right lessons and developed the right way. So winning in life lessons is one of the things that the Positive Coaching Alliance emphasizes with coaches. And the other thing they emphasize with parents is help reinforce the life lessons. Don't coach, and just reinforce those lessons. If you know who John Wooden was, one of the best basketball coaches, kind of a coaching guru, wisdom, and was back in the 1960s, 70s, one of the winningest NC2A men's basketball coach, and lots of wisdom from him. And, if you do your best, you've already won. So now what? Just a couple of suggestions. As a parent, expose your child to as many different sports as you can. Not at the same time, right? But expose them to different sports. So my son did gymnastics for a little while, and then decided that wasn't right. But we kept moving him around and finding different things. He did archery. I kept putting him in places to see what he liked, and we've kind of now hit where he's starting to focus. But expose them. They need to know how to do things. He knows how to swim, but he doesn't like swimming. So ironically enough, but we make sure people know how to swim, right? Listen to your child. What do they like? What don't they like? right? If they come back and they said, I don't really like my coach is mean, maybe listen to that a little bit, and kind of see what's happening there. When you're done with the game, this came out a couple years ago, the one thing you should say to your child, I loved watching you play, plain and simple. And again, my son would always be like, well, what do you think I can improve on, Dad? But you know what? That was his conversation to me. It wasn't me going, this is what you need to improve on. And then encourage them when things get tough, right? Sports can teach a lot of things, resilience and grit and growth mindset. So really when it's getting tough and they're like, I don't know if I want to play anymore, it's not fun, have that conversation of, well, let's finish out the season and let's see what we can do to make it more fun. And if you've heard of growth mindset, the basic idea is that, people believe that they can change and make different changes in their life. And a fixed mindset is really like, I only got so much talent and I can't get any better. So you want to try to instill a growth mindset. As far as a parent, watch some practices. Watch what the coach is saying, right? Is it something that you want your child to experience? Also set boundaries for yourself and your child. If you don't want your child playing club sports yet, then say, we'll play club sports when you're 12 or 13 or 14. Fortunately, my son had an experience with a club lacrosse team. He got invited to a tournament because he's a goalie. They needed a goalie. Nobody wants to get in goal in lacrosse. So they said, come along. We spent almost 3 hours driving up to New Hampshire to play one game. And we were there less than 3 hours. And then we drove back 3 hours. He's like, Dad, I don't want to do that again. I'm like, neither do I. We could have found a game closer in Western Mass or Connecticut. So, what structure do you want in your lives? If something doesn't seem right, be proactive, whether it's coaching, whether it's your child not feeling well, complaining of something's painful, something feels, believe them, and then, figure out what's happening. And again, never let a child play in pain. It may not seem like it's a big deal, but usually when kids complain, there's something going on. So, be paying attention to that. For coaches, just make sure that, doing appropriate developmentally appropriate practices, so what age group are you working with? Way back when Amanda Beard, I don't know if any of you know who Amanda Beard is, a swimmer. She was one of the first people that was so high in the water that her hands would come out of the water just naturally. And then I work at swim camps, and then for the next 5 years, we literally had to unteach this idea of, okay, lift your hands way up out of the water. Because, well, Amanda Beard did it, so then therefore every kid should be able to do it. Well, that totally discounted what Amanda Beard could do as an Olympic athlete as compared to your 11 and 12-year-olds. So a lot of times people will see stuff on YouTube and be like, oh, well, if they can do it, my 12-year-old can do it. Not necessarily. So make sure that things are developmentally appropriate. Make practices fun and engaging, right? Games approach is a new way to look at practices. It's not drills. It's getting people involved and really playing more games. Play all players. Again, kids don't want to sit, and then work to develop every player's skills. They want to get better. So kind of finally, very few sports require early specialization. Okay, gymnastics, certainly one where, age of completion is pretty young. Tennis seems to work, golf seems to work, but it isn't required. If you specialize, unload, take time off and recover, right? So, if they were trying to get you to go 11 months in one of these sports, you're going to break down and you're going to burn out. So take some time off, switch things up, etc. Remember what goals you want for your sport. What do you want for you and your child? What's best for your child's growth? Again, I think we overemphasize or think that children are these mini adults. We really, think, okay, they can train just like everyone else. Well, they can't. They're kids. So where is your child in their growth? Okay. And as much as people want to strike it rich, kids want to learn and have fun. So it's not about the scholarship. It's not about going pro at 10, 11, 12. That might be a discussion when you're in college, but it's certainly not something you should be, encouraging with your child. So thank you very much. And if there's any questions, just let me know.
Thank you so much. It's that was a very good presentation. Thank you so much. So I have a question about the college and what sports is going to look like for the fall. And I wondered if you could maybe just let some of the alums on the call know what's happening in that realm, if you don't mind?
Sure, yeah. So right now, the college, as you may have heard, has canceled all competitions for the fall, which is kind of pretty much most of the local D3 schools are doing that. But we are allowed to practice. So as of yesterday, Lori Hendricks had announced that we have gotten the okay to practice in the fall. Having said that, you know, I'll know we're practicing in the fall when we get in the pool on whatever day we get in the pool. You know, just things are changing so rapidly with COVID and, you know, cases. But we are planning on practicing in the fall. And then the NC2A has given lots of waivers so that fall sports can move to the spring. We just had a conversation this morning among our swim coaches from the new MAC about trying to push to have kind of more of an entire spring season. You know, so we would go January through May. So there's a lot of moving parts right now, but at this point we will not have competitions, but we are expecting to have practices during the fall. And how that looks, I think, is really still an ongoing kind of discussion. We've talked about different ways to social distance and you know, maybe teams will practice every other day instead of every day. And so there's a lot of unknowns at this point with the details of that.
Thank you so much. We do have another question. She said she'd like your comments on swimming, as in my community, swimmers swim for hours each day, usually starting at about 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah, that's the world of swimming, at least in some parts. And I don't necessarily subscribe to that kind of technique. So Amanda Beard, the person that I did mention, actually was coached by a guy called Dave Salo. He's at USC right now. And most of his practices are under 2 hours and less than 5,000 yards. So if you know swimming, you know, yardage is a big thing. And he just works on really high intensity. The world of swimming is slow to come around. So a lot of coaches still believe in lots and lots of yards. I always compare it to track. So if you look at track and swimming, it's about divide by 4. So if you're looking at, or multiply by 4. So if you're looking at 100-yard freestyle and you multiplied it by 4, it would be 400 meters on a track. And so it's roughly 1 minute and 1 minute. 90% of the events that we do in swimming are 2 minutes or less. And then some coaches have their swimmers swimming 9 or 10 miles a day. And, you know, if you've ever watched a track practice, you know, nobody that's doing 100 or a 200 or a 400 is running 9 miles a day. So it's excessive. It's also a, you know, kind of sink or swim, no pun intended. Michael Phelps, you may have heard of him, supposedly in his development had like 6 or 7 days off in the couple years before he trained for the Olympics. In total, every 6 or 7 days off over the course of 2-3 years. You know, and so yes, he won an Olympic gold medal, but how many people could do that? You know, and so it's tough. There are different coaches out there, and the swimming is slowly changing, but yeah, it's still a problem.
Thank you so much for that. We have another question here. It says, I'm a figure skating judge and a former MHC diver. What kind of role do you think officials can and should have in encouraging kids to participate in multiple sports? The coaches are absolutely invested in one sport kids, and I feel like that is counterproductive, especially for the 4 to 10-year-olds.
Especially for the 4 to 10-year-olds, yes. As an official, it's kind of hard to say. Obviously, having conversations with coaches, but again, coaches, they've got to make a living, and they're trying to make a living off of, whoever they can keep on their team. But maybe it's with parents, maybe it's with the association you work with. Again, it's really just trying to open eyes and say, hey, look, what's best for the kids. Yes, I get that it helps you and you want to, have them develop into the best figure skater, but, this probably isn't really developmentally the best thing for them to be on the ice, whatever it is, 4 or 5 times a day. And again, kids getting up early in the morning, a lot of times ice time is in the morning, and go back to also swimming at 5:30 in the morning. Are kids really getting enough sleep for good development and good, performance in the schools? So that's a tough one, but I would, start with that, talk with the coaches, maybe if you've got access to parents, talk with them, but really maybe look at the association as well of, what league you're in and things like that. A little bit harder from a official point of view though.
Thank you, Dave. So, well, I don't have any other questions here for you, but Dave, it's so great to have you here. Thank you so much for showing us all of these wonderful photos, videos, everything. It was wonderful to hear. I enjoyed it myself. I have a 16-year-old at home, so it was helpful for me to hear some of this as well. But thank you very much. And I appreciate it and look forward to having you do this again next year, maybe at Reunion.
Yes, it would be great to do it live.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for being on the webinar with us today. If you have any questions afterward, please feel free to email us, but have a wonderful day.